Picture this: a wedding ceremony. Everyone's crying tears of joy. The couple exchanges vows about eternal love, promises of forever, declarations of undying devotion. The room radiates hope and certainty about a beautiful future together. Now fast forward 10 years. That same couple sits in a therapist's office or at a kitchen table in hostile silence, or in a lawyer's office dividing assets. What happened? Everyone asks this as if it's a mystery, as if something went wrong, as if this particular couple failed where others succeed. But Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher who refused to sugarcoat reality for the sake of comfortable illusions, would tell you nothing went wrong. This is exactly what marriage is. Not the ceremony, not the promises, not the hope-filled beginning, but the slow grinding reality that emerges when romantic intoxication fades and two fundamentally incompatible individuals discover they've legally bound themselves together based on temporary insanity. We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people. And nowhere is this forfeiture more complete, more permanent, and more devastating than in marriage. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that wedding ceremonies deliberately obscure. Marriage isn't the culmination of love. It's the institution that takes whatever genuine connection existed and subjects it to pressures specifically designed to destroy it. Legal obligations, social expectations, financial entanglement, forced proximity, mandated permanence, institutionalized intimacy, and the crushing weight of trying to be happy in an arrangement that wasn't designed for happiness. It was designed for social stability, property transfer, and child rearing. Your happiness was never the point. Walk through any suburban neighborhood on a weekday evening. Look at those houses with their carefully maintained lawns and matching minivans. Behind those doors are people living truths about marriage that nobody speaks at weddings. Truths that would empty venues if spoken during ceremonies. Truths that contradict everything society insists you believe about marriage. Truths that Schopenhauer articulated with brutal clarity because he understood that compassion sometimes requires destroying comfortable lies. The first harsh truth about marriage that nobody dares to say is that it's a legal contract that benefits the state more than the individuals. Schopenhauer recognized that institutions exist to serve collective needs, not individual happiness, and marriage is fundamentally an institution, not a relationship. When you marry, you're not just making a personal commitment. You're entering a legal arrangement with the government as a third party. The state gets to dictate terms of this arrangement, how you can enter it, what obligations it creates, how you can exit it, what consequences follow dissolution. And these terms are designed to serve state interests, which are stability, predictability, resource management, and reproduction. Your interests as an individual are secondary at best. Think about what you're actually doing when you marry. You're signing a contract you haven't read and cannot negotiate. You're agreeing to terms that vary by jurisdiction. You're accepting obligations that can be modified without your consent. You're creating liabilities that extend for years beyond the relationship's end. You're giving a third party the power to enforce terms you never explicitly agreed to. In what other area of life would you sign such a contract? Would you start a business with terms this vague and unilateral? Would you make a financial investment with this little control over outcomes? Would you accept employment with obligations this open-ended and consequences this severe? But marriage is presented as entirely about love, as if the legal and financial dimensions are minor details, rather than the fundamental structure within which your love must operate. And these legal realities create perverse incentives. Staying married when miserable becomes financially rational. Leaving even toxic relationships becomes prohibitively expensive. The sunk costs of years invested make continuing feel necessary. The fear of financial devastation overrides concerns about happiness. Schopenhauer would point out that this isn't a bug in the system. It's the system working as designed. Marriage is meant to be difficult to exit precisely because the state's interest is served by stable family units, regardless of the individual's well-being within those units. The second harsh truth about marriage is that romantic love and long-term partnership are fundamentally incompatible. Schopenhauer understood that romantic love is a temporary madness induced by biological imperatives. It's meant to last long enough to ensure reproduction, not to sustain a lifetime partnership. The feelings that lead you to marry are not the feelings you'll have in the marriage. The passion that made commitment seem desirable doesn't survive routine proximity. The idealization that made your partner seem perfect evaporates under the reality of daily interaction. The excitement that made forever sound appealing transforms into boredom, punctuated by irritation. This isn't failure. This is biology, working exactly as designed. Romantic love floods your brain with neurochemicals that create temporary bonding. But these neurochemicals normalize, usually within 18 to 36 months. Your brain cannot sustain that level of chemical activation indefinitely. It would be physiologically impossible and psychologically exhausting. So the feelings fade. And what remains? Two people who made permanent commitments based on temporary feelings. Two people who promised forever based on a neurochemical state that was always going to end. Two people who built a legal and financial structure around emotions they no longer feel. And society's answer to this predictable problem is that mature love replaces romantic love. That companionship supersedes passion. That partnership matters more than excitement. But Schopenhauer would ask, if partnership was what you wanted, why did you need to be intoxicated by romantic love to choose it? Why does marriage require the temporary insanity of romance to initiate if what actually matters is the practical partnership that follows? The answer is that most people wouldn't voluntarily enter into the obligations of marriage without being chemically compelled to do so. Romance is the bait. Marriage is the trap. And by the time you realize the bait is gone, you're already caught in legal, financial, and social obligations that make escape difficult. The third harsh truth about marriage is that it forces intimacy beyond what most people can psychologically sustain. Schopenhauer used the metaphor of porcupines in winter. They need to huddle together for warmth, but their quills hurt each other when they get too close. So they must find the precise distance that provides warmth without injury. Marriage eliminates this distance adjustment. It mandates constant proximity regardless of psychological needs. You live together. You share space. You coordinate schedules. You make joint decisions. You have unlimited access to each other. You share a bed. You share resources. You share practically everything. And this forced intimacy reveals aspects of your partner that romantic love successfully obscured. Their actual habits. Their real personality under stress. Their true priorities when choices must be made. Their authentic self when not performing for your approval. And what you discover is often disappointing. Not because your partner deceived you, but because romantic love deceived you about your partner. The idealized version you fell in love with was never real. It was a projection created by your neurochemistry and their best behavior during courtship. Marriage reveals the real person. And the real person is more difficult, more flawed, more irritating, more different from you than you imagined. They have annoying habits you didn't notice during dates. They have personality traits that grate during daily proximity. They have needs that conflict with yours. They have ways of being that don't align with how you prefer to live. And you can't escape this revelation because marriage means constant exposure. You can't maintain comfortable distance. You can't take extended breaks. You can't preserve mystery or absence that might make the heart grow fonder. You're just there together all the time, witnessing each other's worst moments, most irritating habits, and least attractive qualities. Schopenhauer would say this forced intimacy is exactly what kills love, because love requires some degree of distance, mystery, and imagination. When you know everything about someone, when you see them at their worst daily, when their flaws are constantly visible, the romantic idealization that brought you together cannot survive. The fourth harsh truth about marriage is that it requires the death of your authentic self. Schopenhauer believed that most people never discover their authentic self because social pressures demand conformity, and marriage is the ultimate conformity machine. To make a marriage work, you must compromise. This is presented as virtue, as maturity, as the essence of partnership. But compromise means abandoning your authentic preferences, needs, and ways of being to accommodate another person. You like silence. They need conversation. So you compromise by having moderate noise levels that don't truly satisfy either preference. You're a night person, they're a morning person, so you compromise by existing in a schedule that doesn't match either biological rhythm. You want minimalism, they want accumulation, so you compromise by having moderate amounts of stuff that feels like too much to you and too little to them. Every compromise is a small death of your authentic self, and marriage requires thousands of these small deaths. How you spend your time, how you spend your money, where you live, what you eat, how you socialize, how you relax, what temperature you keep the house, how clean you maintain spaces, what you do on weekends, how you celebrate holidays. Every single aspect of life becomes subject to negotiation and compromise. And the person you are after years of constant compromise is no longer the person you were. You've modified yourself so thoroughly to fit into a partnership that you've lost touch with your authentic preferences. You no longer know what you actually want, because you've trained yourself to want what's compatible with the relationship. You've internalized the compromises so completely that they feel like your genuine preferences. You've forgotten who you were before you started accommodating another person's needs. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the tragedy of marriage. You enter it as an individual and emerge as a modified version designed for partnership. And if the marriage ends, you can't simply return to who you were. That person is gone. You've permanently altered yourself. The fifth harsh truth about marriage is that it creates obligations that override your own well-being. Schopenhauer understood that most human misery comes from prioritizing others' needs over your own. And marriage institutionalizes this prioritization. You're expected to stay when you're unhappy because leaving would hurt your partner. You're obligated to sacrifice your goals for the relationship's goals. You're required to endure difficulties because you made vows. You're supposed to work on the relationship even when working on it makes you miserable. You're meant to consider your partner's feelings before your own. You're duty-bound to maintain the marriage even at the cost of your own fulfillment. These obligations are framed as love, commitment, and maturity. But Schopenhauer would call them what they are: institutionalized self-sacrifice that serves the marriage while destroying the individual. Watch what happens when someone leaves a marriage because they're unhappy. Society doesn't celebrate their choice to prioritize their well-being. Society condemns them for abandoning their obligations. They're selfish for leaving. They're failures for not making it work. They're immature for not honoring their commitments. They're cruel for hurting their partner. And this condemnation serves a purpose. It enforces the social norm that marriage obligations override individual well-being. That you should stay miserable rather than leave and be called selfish. That the institution matters more than the individuals within it. That your vows matter more than your happiness. This creates a trap where people remain in marriages that diminish them, because leaving would violate obligations that somehow became more important than their own lives. And they stay until they've wasted years, sometimes decades, being less than they could have been, sacrificing potential and possibility on the altar of obligation. The sixth harsh truth about marriage is that it turns love into labor. Schopenhauer recognized that anything that becomes obligatory loses its spontaneous joy, and marriage takes the spontaneous joy of love and transforms it into scheduled maintenance work. You don't express affection when you feel it. You express it because the relationship requires it. You don't spend quality time together because you desire it. You schedule date nights because marriage experts say you must. You don't have sex when passion strikes. You have sex because it's been too long and the relationship needs it. You don't say I love you from overflow of feeling. You say it because not saying it would cause problems. Everything that was spontaneous becomes calculated. Everything that was joyful becomes dutiful. Everything that was natural becomes strategic. Love becomes work. Constant, exhausting work that never ends. You work on communication. You work on conflict resolution. You work on maintaining intimacy. You work on keeping passion alive. You work on managing expectations. You work on compromising fairly. You work on staying connected. You work on growing together. And this work is never complete because relationships require constant maintenance. They don't maintain themselves. They don't stay good automatically. They demand continuous effort, attention, and energy. Schopenhauer would ask, if love requires this much work, is it actually love? Or is it just two people forcing themselves to remain in an arrangement that no longer serves them but that they're obligated to maintain? The seventh harsh truth about marriage is that it creates a competitive dynamic around suffering. Schopenhauer observed that humans naturally compare their suffering to others. And in marriage, this comparison becomes toxic. Who sacrificed more? Who's working harder at the relationship? Who's more unhappy? Who's making bigger compromises? Who's doing more invisible labor? Who's suffering more from the arrangement? Couples keep score, not explicitly always, but the ledger exists. Every sacrifice gets noted. Every compromise gets recorded. Every effort gets tracked. And when conflict arises, these ledgers get weaponized. I gave up my career for you. I moved away from my family for you. I've been patient with your issues. I've sacrificed my wants for our needs. I've put in more effort than you. I'm unhappier than you, and I'm staying anyway. This competition serves no positive purpose. It doesn't improve the relationship. It doesn't increase happiness. It just ensures both people feel their suffering is unappreciated while their partner's suffering is exaggerated. And this dynamic reveals something fundamental about marriage that Schopenhauer understood. When an arrangement makes both people miserable, they don't unite in recognizing the arrangement is the problem. They compete over who's more victimized by it while defending the arrangement itself. Because admitting the arrangement is the problem would mean admitting their suffering was avoidable, that they chose this, that they could leave. And those admissions are more painful than continuing to suffer while blaming each other. The eighth harsh truth about marriage is that it often survives on shared misery rather than shared joy. Schopenhauer believed that shared suffering creates stronger bonds than shared pleasure. And nowhere is this more evident than in long-term marriages. Couples who stay together often aren't happy together. They're just equally trapped by circumstances that make leaving worse than staying. Financial entanglement makes divorce prohibitively expensive. Children create obligations that override personal happiness. Shared property complicates separation. Extended family relationships would be damaged. Social circles would fracture. Standard of living would decrease for both people. Fear of being alone outweighs misery together. Sunk costs make continuing feel necessary despite dissatisfaction. And so they stay, not because the marriage is good, but because leaving is worse. Not because they love each other, but because they're bound by mutual obligations. Not because they're happy, but because they're equally trapped. And they call this commitment. They call it working through difficulties. They call it mature love that has replaced passion. But Schopenhauer would call it what it is. Two people serving a life sentence they're too afraid to escape from. Bonded not by joy but by shared imprisonment in an arrangement neither would choose if starting fresh. Watch older couples who've been married for decades. Society celebrates their longevity as evidence of successful marriage. But talk to them honestly, and many will admit they're not particularly happy. They're just committed to an arrangement they no longer have the energy to leave. They've accommodated each other's worst qualities for so long that they've forgotten better might exist. They've lowered their expectations so thoroughly that absence of active conflict feels like success. They've normalized their dissatisfaction to the point where they can't even imagine alternative ways of living. This is what marriage often becomes, not the passionate partnership promised at weddings, but a functional arrangement between two people who've learned to tolerate each other's presence while calling that tolerance love. The ninth harsh truth about marriage is that it requires constant self-deception to remain tolerable. Schopenhauer understood that most people live in self-imposed illusions because reality is too painful to confront directly. And marriage requires industrial-scale self-deception. You must convince yourself you're happy when you're not. You must insist your marriage is good when it's mediocre. You must claim your partner is your best friend when you often can't stand them. You must maintain that you'd make the same choice again when you wouldn't. You must assert that marriage enriched your life when it constrained it. You must believe your sacrifices were worth it when they weren't. This self-deception is necessary because the alternative is unbearable. If you admitted you're unhappy, you'd have to explain why you're staying. If you acknowledged your marriage is mediocre, you'd have to confront that you settled. If you recognized your partner isn't your best friend, you'd have to face that you've prioritized obligation over authentic connection. If you admitted you wouldn't make the same choice again, you'd have to grapple with having wasted years on a mistake. So you lie. To others, but more importantly, to yourself. You construct narratives about how marriage is hard work but worth it, about how mature love is different from romantic love, about how partnership matters more than passion, about how you've grown together even though you've actually just both diminished to fit into an arrangement that suits neither person fully. And these lies become so habitual that you believe them. You've told the story of your happy marriage so many times that you can no longer distinguish the story from reality. You've performed contentment so consistently that you've convinced yourself the performance is genuine. You've defended your choice to marry so often that you've become invested in that defense being true. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the ultimate tragedy. Not just that marriage often makes people unhappy, but that it requires them to deny their unhappiness so thoroughly that they lose the capacity to recognize it. They've gaslighted themselves into believing they're satisfied with an arrangement that's actually destroying them slowly. The 10th harsh truth about marriage is that it often prevents growth rather than facilitating it. Society claims that marriage helps people grow, that partnership challenges you to become better, that love inspires self-improvement. But Schopenhauer would argue the opposite. Marriage typically stunts growth by creating comfort and routine that eliminate the discomfort necessary for development. When you're single, discomfort motivates change. When you're lonely, you develop social skills. When you're bored, you pursue new interests. When you're unhappy, you examine your life. When you're challenged, you grow. Marriage provides a comfortable routine that eliminates these pressures. You have built-in companionship so you don't develop social skills. You have predictable activities so you don't seek new experiences. You have an explanation for your life so you don't examine it. You have someone else to focus on so you don't confront yourself. And this comfort becomes a cage. You stop growing because growth requires discomfort, and marriage provides just enough comfort to make discomfort avoidable. You stop challenging yourself because you have a partner to accommodate. You stop pursuing individual dreams because you have shared obligations. You stop becoming who you might have been because you're too busy being who the marriage needs you to be. Look at people before and after marriage. Often the most vibrant, interesting, curious people become domesticated versions of themselves. Not because marriage improves them, but because it rounds off their edges, moderates their extremes, normalizes their peculiarities. They become less of what made them unique, and more of what makes them compatible with partnership. And they call this growth. But Schopenhauer would recognize it as diminishment. They haven't become better versions of themselves. They've become smaller, more manageable, less threatening to domestic harmony. They've traded their potential for stability, their dreams for security, their authentic self for an acceptable partner. The 11th and deepest harsh truth about marriage is that it's a bet against yourself. Schopenhauer understood that the self is not static, but constantly changing. The person you are at 30 is different from who you'll be at 40. The person you are at 40 is different from who you'll be at 50. Your values change. Your priorities shift. Your interests evolve. Your needs transform. Your goals redirect. Marriage assumes stability in a system designed for change. When you marry, you're betting that the person you are now will remain compatible with the person your partner becomes. You're betting that your future self will honor commitments made by a past version of yourself. You're betting that changes you both undergo will somehow keep you compatible. You're betting that you'll grow in the same direction at the same rate. You're betting that what you want now is what you'll want in 20 years. And these bets typically lose, because people change in unpredictable ways. The ambitious person becomes content. The content person becomes ambitious. The social person wants solitude. The solitary person wants community. The person who wanted children changes their mind. The person who didn't want children now does. The person who valued career now values leisure. The person who valued leisure now values achievement. And when you change in incompatible directions, the marriage becomes a cage. You're committed to someone you're no longer compatible with. You're obligated to honor vows made by someone you no longer are. You're bound to circumstances that no longer suit you. And leaving requires admitting that you made a bad bet, that you committed before you knew who you'd become, that you traded flexibility for security, and got neither. Schopenhauer would say this is why marriage is fundamentally unwise. You're making permanent commitments based on temporary compatibility. You're binding your future self based on your present self's preferences. You're eliminating flexibility in a world where flexibility is essential for navigating inevitable change. And the tragedy is that this truth becomes obvious only after you're already committed, only after you've changed in ways that make the commitment painful, only after you realize the person you've become doesn't align with the choice the previous version of yourself made. What city are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments right now. These 11 harsh truths reveal what Schopenhauer understood about marriage that society desperately conceals. Marriage isn't the romantic partnership promised at weddings. It's a legal contract serving state interests, a forced intimacy that kills authentic connection, an obligation machine that prioritizes the institution over individual well-being, a conformity requirement that destroys authentic selfhood, a labor assignment that transforms love into work, a competition over suffering, a prison maintained by shared misery, a delusion requiring constant self-deception, a growth stunter disguised as growth facilitator, and a bet against your future self that typically loses. None of this means marriage is wrong for everyone. It means marriage should be chosen with brutal honesty about what it actually is, rather than romantic delusions about what it promises to be. The question isn't whether marriage can work. The question is whether you're willing to pay its actual cost for its actual benefits rather than its promised cost for its promised benefits. Because the gap between promise and reality is where most marriages live. In that space between what you thought you were choosing and what you actually got, between who you thought you'd become and who you actually became, between the life you imagined and the life you're actually living. Write in the comments, I choose honest sight over comfortable blindness, and join the growing community of people who've decided that truth, however harsh, is more valuable than illusion, however comforting. These are people who understand that Schopenhauer's gift wasn't pessimism but clarity, not depression, but liberation from false hope, not cynicism, but the courage to see reality without the distorting lens of social conditioning. Hit subscribe because next week we're pulling back the curtain on another sacred institution that society protects with layers of mythology designed to prevent you from examining it honestly. The philosophy that frees your mind doesn't stop at marriage. It extends to every area where you've been told to accept without questioning, to participate without examining, to commit without calculating. You're already on the path that most people are too afraid to walk. And what comes next will take you even further into territory where truth matters more than comfort, and clarity matters more than certainty.